bring this presentation to you today. Just noting that we are recording this meeting, so I know there's a few folks who couldn't make it. We want to make sure that we can cascade this out to your teams. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which I join you from today, and acknowledge the TOs from where you join us from, and acknowledge their leaders past, present and emerging. This is going to have a deep dive from the subject matter expert who I'll introduce in just a moment around this fascinating, really large study around consumer-led demand for Australia's fruits, nuts and vegetables into these export markets. I'd like to, when we get started, and when I'll just introduce Pat in a second, and when we get started and he shares his presentation, I'll invite everyone to turn their cameras off and stay on mute. But then when we've got Q&A, to turn your cameras and your microphones back on again. If you've got any questions, type them in the chat. We do have time for Q&A at the end. If there's any problems with the technology, we can't hear us or something goes wrong, please put it in the chat or reach out to Jade or I will make sure that we can reconnect you back up. But let me introduce you to Patrick Fry, who's a partner growth strategy at Kantar, a leading Australian strategy house in brand and consumer expertise, both here and in Australia. Here in Australia and internationally. And Pat's going to talk you through the methodology and the results of the study to help you understand how to read the 2,000 plus pages of the report so that you can make sense of them and you'll know how to dip into them for your business or for your sector. You will see that there's quite a few horticulture innovation staff joining us today. We want to make sure that as you learn about the results and how to read them, that we also do the same. So you may see some familiar faces or names in the crowd here. So again, Pat, I'm just about to hand over to you. And just for those that have just joined us, if we can just keep our cameras off while Pat's presenting, so we can you can see his presentation as well as you can, and we'll stay on mute, and then we'll come for Q&A throughout the session. So over to you, Pat.
Thanks, Mila. I'll just share my screen, and once I get it on presentation mode, if you could just let me know that you can see it okay.
I can, thanks, that's great.
Great. Okay, so today we'll cover, well, three things really. The appendix is here if we get to it, but I'll take you through the background and objectives of the overall program, so it'll set it up. We'll then focus on the market prioritisation matrix and the inputs into that, because that was really the nub of this, about identifying where to play and what are the biggest opportunities for profitable growth for horticulture products, and particularly berries. Then we'll delve into each of the different berries in the report. So you'll see there's a lot in this, and there's fruit, vegetables and nuts. You'll find this in the fruit report, and you can see we'll go through each one in turn. So conscious of time, so I'll canter on through. But as Mila said, if you have a question, we'll get to it hopefully, and we'll have enough time. So bear with me. So first of all, the background. So COVID-19 obviously very disruptive, and it has impacted Australia's ability to export. So Hort Innovation proactively initiated investing in several critical projects. One of those was a Deloitte program which looked at identifying 13 markets that could offer potential growth. So we've used this program off the back of that, and we have used some of that data. So that's been a useful jumping off point. So we're building on the foundations of that, but leaning into the more consumer-led understanding, because that's really historically been a gap for us here in Hort and in some of the industries. So this is really about understanding consumption, the idea being to identify export growth opportunities for commodities, and in this case, the berries. I won't go into too much detail. You can have access to these reports, but the good news here is that we've used the key bits of analysis and data points in our workings, so that you don't necessarily have to go back here. But if you're interested to know why those markets were selected, you can find it there. Curiously, India wasn't included originally. It was 17 in the market, but it was put in because it was felt that that was a big opportunity, and certainly we found in our data that it is. So that was a good decision. So the central question, and we do this for all these types of programs, which is our North Star, and this one was, how can Australian horticultural industries unlock growth by generating consumer demand for different categories across different international markets for today and, most importantly, tomorrow? And this was very much focused on what the future might look like, so bear that in mind. So the objectives, as I mentioned, were consumer-led perspectives. So we did large-scale consumer surveys across the 13 markets. And this helped us unpack consumers' attitudes and values to fresh produce shopping, consumption of fruits, vegetables and nuts across the markets. And the idea was to provide a strategic lens on which markets represent the most attractive opportunities for the commodities. And we'll show you the results here today for your particular industries. So we identify the commodities where they have the strongest right to play within each market. And this is really about optimising export and product positioning so that it facilitates the deployment of effective coordinated trade marketing resources and investment across these markets in the future. I won't go this into detail, but there was a 4-step process. We started with a bit of an audit discovery. We interviewed some local experts to understand what the market dynamics were and some of the structural elements that helped guide the large phase of the program, which was point 3, which was a large sample survey across the 13 markets, mostly N equals 4,000. Some of them, like Qatar, were a bit less, but a very large sample, and 2 occasions, so 8,000 occasions in those markets where we sampled 4,000. And then we're in the align and embed phase, which is all about presenting the work and helping you understand how to read it. And as Mila said, there's 2,000 plus pages of research. So we try to include everything in here so that it's useful for you going forward. Just a reminder of the markets: USA, UK, Singapore, India, as I said, was added, Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, Malaysia, UAE, Qatar, Taiwan, Vietnam and Indonesia. You'll note that China's not included, and that was intentional because the idea was to look at ways to diversify beyond China. So that was an intentional decision. And there are all the commodities. You can see the berries in there. In this case, it's blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries that we'll cover today. And as I said, there are 3 reports you can access. You'll find everything you need in the fruit report that you'll have access to. Right. So the market prioritisation and how we calculated it, which is really important to understand the inputs, because as you know, we've used the data heavily, so make sure that it's an objective and a data-driven approach to help you make export decisions. So mostly this was from a consumer perspective, based off that primary research data that I talked about, and this was to determine which markets represent the strongest growth opportunities for Australian exports based on commodity usage, Australian appeal and the ability to command a premium. But it's also worth noting that we've also included things like supply chain, regulatory environment and trade arrangements, and that came from a lot of the Deloitte and also secondary and third-party available data sources. And that was just to make sure that we covered everything when it came to things like market access, for example. But I'll show you in more detail in a minute what data we've used so that you know what goes into it. But fundamentally, we evaluate, and we do this a lot, to identify markets and prioritise based on 2 dimensions. Firstly, attractiveness. So how attractive is the consumer opportunity in a market for a commodity? That's dimension number 1. And secondly, addressability. So how addressable is the consumer opportunity in a market for a commodity? So effectively, how easy or hard is it to go after? And when we put those 2 things together, it really helps us to prioritise where we can spend our money or best spend our investment. So firstly, attractiveness. This calculation was made up of 3 metrics. Firstly, penetration, which is basically how often you consume a commodity. Second one is likely to pay a premium. So how likely would you be willing to pay more for a premium quality commodity? Premium that comes in. And thirdly, market access. And they were weighted 30, 40 and 30, added up to 100. So the weightings and what goes into these was helped devise through the input from Hort Innovation and also PRG, a group of experts that helped guide this program, so we appreciated their help on this. So they're the questions that went into it, but I'll focus a bit on that third one, which is the market access, and this came from metrics like this. So unpicking that. So market access attractiveness was based on 3 things. So the first one was import dependency. So things like 3-year average value of imports, consumption share of production, 10-year change in value of imports. So that helped us because the higher the values in those demonstrate greater reliance on imports and sustained growth. So the higher the numbers, the more attractive. Secondly, the future economic prospects, so things like GDP per capita change. So that was between 20 and 30. So once again, a future view. And the level of change in urban population. So with that meaning that the higher the values demonstrate, the larger the high income markets are. So once again, the higher the number, the more attractive it is. And finally, preference advantage. So that included things like the quality of demand. Do horticulture imports align with AU exports? And is the country in the Northern Hemisphere? There's seasonal factors that came into that. So once again, the higher the scores, the greater potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself. So there you can see there's lots of things, both on the consumer side and from the economic side, that went into whether a market is attractive or not. So the second dimension is addressability. So the first, so once again, 3 inputs went into this. The first one was likelihood to purchase Australian. So that was simple. Which would you be most likely to buy imported from Australia? And we'll look at the questions in a moment. The ability to command a premium. So how willing would you be to pay more for a premium quality commodity? So that helps us to look at the untapped premium opportunity. And then finally, market access, which is another 30%. And that includes things like this. So 2 dimensions, again, in this element or factor. So ease of trade and country risk. So it included things like foreign competition, the existence of free trade agreements already or in negotiation, political stability, and things like the WTO dispute status. So the higher the scores indicate the lower cost of doing business and at reduced risk of market disruption from political factors. So obviously the higher the score, the more attractive, or more addressable, I should say, in this page. And then value chain competitiveness. So relative distance to market. So obviously the further away, the less attractive because it's a lot harder to get to. And things like port, transport, infrastructure index. And then Australia horticultural import prices relative to country average. So when we rank them, it was around the potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself in a market. So once again, higher scores makes it more addressable. So we bring this together in a matrix, which helps the prioritisation to represent those consumer opportunities. And I'll just want to give you a bit more context, because when we presented some of this originally, many questions came up, so we've just got some contextual slides here to help understand why we've made the decisions we've made. But first of all, just a quick around the houses about how to read the matrix that I'll share in a minute. So first of all, on the right-hand side, addressability, and also if you look at the top right, not surprisingly, where things are highly attractive and highly addressable, they're a strategic priority. And this is strong overall consumer export opportunity. But where things are easier to address but not so attractive, we would call these low-hanging fruit. So worth going after, particularly in the short term. You're just not going to get as much return as you would for some of the more attractive to the north of this chart. Everything to the left of the chart, where addressability is a bit harder, this takes a little bit longer and might cost a bit more to go after. So where things are in the top left of the chart, where it's a long-term play, these are things where it is harder to go after them, but there's an attractive opportunity, so it's worthwhile investing in the long term. It may take longer, as it suggests. It may cost a bit more, but because of the attractiveness and the appeal of it, it might be worthwhile, and you'll get more return on your investment. Where, however, things are not easy to address and not attractive, not surprisingly, they're low priority, because it's not to say that you can't go after them and that you shouldn't stay there if you're already there, but it's to say that, relatively speaking, this data would certainly suggest that the weight of investment would be better spent elsewhere, because a low priority market is one where it might take you longer, cost more, you may not even realise the return, or the return might not be very good, particularly compared to other markets that's a strategic priority. So I think that's worth keeping in mind, because this was very much about the future view. So that's what's guided this program, to look at where do we go from here. Now, there were 4 key considerations I just want to touch on briefly before I show you the results. And they cover things like existing technical market access, secondly, markets with existing trade, thirdly, the premium opportunity, and fourth is the focus of investment. Now, the first one around existing technical market access for a commodity, it was intentionally not included in the evaluation of addressability. And the reason for this is that the project was designed to identify future growth geographies. Therefore, the analysis was not restricted by current arrangements, so we didn't want to be tied into the today. So this research hopefully is intended to support and inform industry decisions regarding the progress of any potential future ongoing market access or market improvement requests. So that's why we didn't include that in the calculation. Secondly, while addressability calculation includes data on general access and trade, it intentionally does not include whether Australia currently trades in a particular commodity. And this is because the goal of the analysis is to provide an objective assessment of whether a market is attractive or addressable, independent of current arrangements. So, if a market that we're currently trading with for a particular commodity is shown not to be in a strategic priority, it doesn't mean we should consider withdrawing from that market. However, the data would suggest that we would recommend re-evaluating the relative focus of investment in this market and consider other markets when looking for future growth opportunities, because the data would suggest that you might get a better return on investment elsewhere. And we'll come back to this when we talk about Japan, because Mila talked about that being one of great debate when we presented this in other areas. So we can share the data with you, and it would be interesting to see other data sources that might be different to this. But in this, the data is very, very clear. The other thing that's good about this source is that because it's across 13 markets, it's very handy to be able to compare. So it's not a standalone piece. It's got lots of commodities and lots of markets, so quite comparable across the whole program. The third one was premium. So in evaluating attractiveness and addressability, we have intentionally used data that shows where premium opportunities can be found. And the reason for this is we wanted to identify profitable growth opportunities, so not just places where you can dump volume. So Australian commodities have more of a chance of growing profitably, where you've got a better chance of commanding a premium. So in that regard, high commodity penetration in the market has also been used for attractiveness, but the analysis favours markets where there's larger opportunity for a product to command a premium. So you'll see that in the calculation. That's why we put it in. And finally, focus of investment. The evaluation and prioritisation of markets into the quadrants is intended to be only one input into the decision-making process. And that's because the objective of the project was primarily to offer a consumer lens into commodity consumption. Now, we have used other elements. We still include additional market factors from the previous Deloitte analysis and others, which I've shown you. But exports decisions should be made using all available information, and this would include things like the economics of local growers and exporters. So this report is intended to form one input, but we hope it's going to be a big input because it's a large data set and a very robust sample. So I think you'll find that it's very useful. But if you have anything else that we haven't included in here, please use it in the decision-making process. We encourage you to do that. So, well, I might pause there just before I go into the first of the commodities, just to see if there's any questions about our approach, the method, and some of those considerations. And if you put your hand up or put your camera on, otherwise we'll crack on, Mila.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands or camera on, and just have a wave at us, or microphone on and just yell at us. We might keep going.
Well, hopefully that all makes sense. So we'll keep going, and I think when you'll see the results, it'll start to come to life. So let's start with blackberries. So when we throw all of the data into our algorithm, this is what we get. So for blackberries, remembering these are all relative, so that's worth keeping in mind. But the markets that came up as the strategic priorities, i.e. more attractive and addressable compared to other markets, were Indonesia, Vietnam, UAE and India. Singapore also came up as a low-hanging fruit, so fairly addressable in terms of it's the third most addressable market, but less attractive for various reasons, which I can cover if we need to go into the detail of that. Qatar also just in the low-hanging fruit bucket. The next one that interests is the USA. For lots of the commodities, addressability in the USA is difficult and particularly relative to others, mainly given the distance, tariffs that still exist there. Local market competitiveness is very high. I can't remember if that's the case for blackberries or not. Also, exports from countries in South America, Canada, and other local, more geographically sympathetic countries also contribute to that. So it's hard to get things to Australia for all those reasons, or to the USA from Australia. UK is also in that bucket, and price is a thing for UK consumers too. They're used to being able to get quality for not much money, so their appetite for premium is lower. And there's Japan again down low, and we can have a look at that data if that's contentious for blackberries. But it's very, very clear what the data shows and how we've done it. So there's no black box here. All of this data is objective, and it's all been shared, all the calculations. So yeah, we can absolutely delve into that. But that's how it lands. So what I might do is once again pause now that you've seen the results and see if there's anything here that is surprising, or is an observation that this makes sense to lots of people. That's certainly the results that or the feedback we've had mostly, that this makes sense. Excepting Japan, Mila, to your point, that's the one that seems to be contentious, but we can talk about that if that's the case for blackberries.
Thanks, Pat. We've got a question in the chat already. I'll go to the chat one first, if that's all right, Rachel, and it's from Jenny. If you turns on a microphone, she can ask it, or I will, which is around were there any particular metrics or a particular metric that pushed Hong Kong down to the left-hand side of the box?
Let me just check, shall we? Give me a moment.
Yep. While you do some exploring, I'll just explain to folks that the sort of background information that Pat is delving into, all of this information is available in the appendices. So this is a great place to ask these questions, so you can sort of see how to navigate the reports for yourself if you want them. But, you know, please do use this time and ask these questions. Thanks, Pat.
I'm just having a quick scan at the data here just to give you an answer, and I can certainly tell you why. So look, the main one actually is the likelihood to buy blackberries imported from Australia. So that's this chart, and this the thing about this is it gives you a view of the sentiment, and we talked a lot about this earlier in the week with one of the other commodities, which is you can see how where the opportunity in places like Indonesia, India, Vietnam, UAE, that openness to Australia and that willingness to buy is so much higher. So when we look at Hong Kong here, and Mila, the Japan again, unfortunately, is right down the bottom. And as I said earlier, the great thing about this study is that it was so big. So it does mean that you can compare across other markets. So all of the questions and the surveys across the markets were the same, exactly the same. So we didn't, other than the different lists, so some fruits were different in other markets, but the way we asked the questions and the format was exactly the same, so they're highly, highly comparable. So the question around Hong Kong here, the likelihood to buy imported really is the one that dragged it down. If I look at some of the other metrics though, for that, the willingness to pay premium's high, so that wasn't a reason. But the other one was how often do you consume blackberries? So penetration was not too bad, but lower relative to those other markets that made it into the top quadrant. It's worth bearing in mind that it's on the cusp, so it almost made it into the long-term play box. So in terms of attractiveness, it was really that penetration that brought it down. The willingness to pay premium is pretty good, and then market access is fairly middle. So I think we can fairly say that it was that, relatively speaking, how often do you consume blackberries? But like I said in the contextual, it's not to say that you shouldn't go after Hong Kong or come out of it. It's just to see that when you look at relative to other markets, when we're talking about future investment, you can see how the UAE and Qatar and places like that, there's more going on, or there's more opportunity. So it's not to say you shouldn't still think of Hong Kong. It's just thinking of it relative to other markets when you think about future investment. That's what this is all about.
Thanks, Pat. That's really useful for you to answer it by showing us the data that's there, that's built up that story. So Rachel, you've had your hand up patiently.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's fascinating and really good to have a data-driven approach to these considerations, because I think a lot of it's sort of been on gut feel in the past. But I guess interestingly with blackberries, obviously they're a category in Australia that is still pretty small and is growing. So I suppose my understanding was that Asian markets in general, rubus wasn't particularly well known or well understood category. And I think when we went to Thailand, and I know, did you look at Thailand or not?
No, it didn't make it in the top, and maybe that's because of some of the things that you found, or
we just didn't see any on the shelves from anywhere, which was quite
go.
interesting. So, it's interesting that the opportunity is as significant as you think it might be in, say, Indonesia and India.
Look, I think this is all relative, Rachel, so please bear that in mind. So if you are interested in Indonesia, and if that's a source of interest, which I think it should be for blackberries, there's a whole Indonesia report, which also tells you a lot more detail about Indonesian consumers and the shopping habits and all of that. So the intent of this first study is to say, for blackberries, here's where we think you should be looking. Then I would encourage you to look at Indonesia, Vietnam, UAE, and India as a first port of call. They each have their own market report. And that can then also contribute to the decision making that you make, because that's got all the commodities in it as well. So we then flip this on its head, where the Indonesia has this bubble chart is actually with all the commodities. So you can see how blackberries performs relative to other commodities. So that's a helpful piece of information as well before you make that decision.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Rachel. We've also got a question from Fruit Growers. Taz, you're more than welcome to turn your microphone on and ask the question. It's in the chat, but it's also around Taiwan and the size of the bubble, the penetration bubble. Could you give us a little bit more insight to that, Pat, and the way you explore the other pieces of data and the other figures? It can also guide people of how they're going to be able to read these reports themselves. So as we've mentioned, the slides that Pat's showing are available in the full report. So if you can follow the methodology of what we're doing here, we're trying to teach you how to fish. Teach you how to do it yourself. So thanks, Pat.
Yeah, so all of the pieces of the puzzle are here, and hopefully it's in a form that is very readable. So I mentioned that each of the dimensions had 3 inputs. So when you go to this chart, this is the first one that you'll get when you open your section. There's a little bit of a summary here, which is for those of you who are kind of just want to see the top line. So we've worked very closely with Quad Innovation and the PRG to come up with a format and some slides that actually help for different levels of appetite for detail, I suppose. We've got every bit of data that you need for those of you who love data, but we've also got some high level things, which is really a story. But if we look at the 3 inputs, this is number 1, this is number 2, and this is number 3 for attractiveness. So they're all in order. They'll come straight after. And then addressability. Also, these are the 3 metrics. So this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. And if you remember going back to the weighting, each one of those was 30, 40, and 30% as a weight. So you can actually take the numbers off these charts and plug them into the computer yourself, and you can work it out. But in terms of penetration, it was based on a question, quite simply, how often do you consume blackberries? And we took consumed at least once a week. The percentages, it was Taiwan, the question here. This is 12%. So 12% of consumers in Taiwan said that they eat blackberries at least once a week. And that's how we determined the size of the bubble. And you can see how it's relative to all the other markets.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I think in explaining that relativity allows us to compare commodity by commodity as we start to look at those graphs and also the different markets. Really appreciate that. If there's any further questions, hands up or in the chat, or turn your microphone on. Thanks, Pat. We might keep going.
Okay, so that's the section around what goes into the prioritisation. So hopefully that you can work that out, and hopefully it makes sense. So now this next section, and we started about a year ago now when we were starting to report on this, having all the markets in there, but it was felt as a project team and Hort Innovation PRG that we should only focus on the priorities. But you can go to the appendix and you can get everything every bit of data on every market. So rest assured that's there. So this next section is really to articulate what, so if these were the markets that the data would suggest that we recommend that you would go after as an investment, this just gives you a snapshot of what blackberry consumption looks like across these markets. So you can see, first of all, the how often, 28, 24, 26, 20, 36. So there's some data there, which is the way to kind of read penetration. And these are the W's and the when, how, why, where, who, with. So it's a bit of a snapshot, as it says at the top. Why, what are the key things that we need to know about blackberries across the piece? And you can see that snacking and breakfast, in terms of the when. Vietnam, lunch and dinner is also a thing. So what was really interesting when we did the study is, looking at it at a holistic level, but then delving into some of the nuances, and certainly Vietnam has some quite unique things. So if that's a market that you're going after, it does really start to unpick the different ways you need to approach the market and what types of things they're looking for and how they use them. And you can see that the how here is fresh on its own, big in India, but as part of a snack in Vietnam, and there's a bit more detail in the deck around how that's used. In Indonesia, in a smoothie, in a frappe, in a juice, in a salad. But similarly, UAE is fresh on its own like India. And then the why, so that's the fundamental, why do people pick up a blackberry? And taste is obviously a key thing, and that comes up top. But it's the secondary, or the second most important thing for blackberry is different for each market. So in India, it's connection, so that's sharing. Vietnam, it's seen as an indulgence, so that would lend itself to that idea of the premiumness in Vietnam, seen as an indulgence. Health and nutrition in Indonesia, you can see how that slightly changes the way you might go to market. And then in UAE, it's a convenient, quick and easy snack. At home with family, all pretty consistent, so that's useful. And then we go on to strategic imperatives, and this covers some of the previous slide, but also looks at things like the functional attributes, that premium opportunity, barriers and substitutes. So if we look across functional, refreshing taste comes up top for functionally. Fresh and light is another thing that's really important in India and Vietnam. In terms of Vietnam, Indonesia, they also are looking for antioxidants. It's a thing that people would say is a functional reason why they choose blackberries. And in UAE, sweet is something they like. When it comes to premium opportunity, and this is, the question was asked around, what would make you buy a premium blackberry? Fresh is one, and that came across a lot of commodities. Organic or free from pesticides was big in India and Indonesia. And safety, and in India we know that food safety is a big deal, so premium blackberry, the trust in its safety is a big deal. Flavour in Vietnam also comes right, and higher in vitamins and minerals in Indonesia, so that health and wellness or health and nutrition thing coming through again in that premium opportunity. So it's not just a core need, it's also for the premiumness in Indonesia. UAE also likes organic. And then really taking advantage of that, there's lots more barriers, but these are the top ones. Expensive, so that might be a challenge to overcome. Noting that this is relative, so people always say that they're too expensive, but in this case, that seems to be consistent. So, but bruising easily was another one that came up for lots of commodities, actually, particularly in Vietnam. If you can resolve that barrier, then you'll sell more premium or blackberries overall as well. And then it's about sort of stealing share, really, or competing with the key substitutes. So apples, bananas, mangoes, and strawberries are the ones that come up. Blueberries also there. So you'll see more detail in a minute on that. That's just a bit of a snapshot once again for those, that audience that just really want to see on a page. So let me just share you a bit more about the report and how this comes to life. So then following those snapshots, you can see all the detail here. So I'll try to canter through this relatively quickly given the time, but also I'll sort of show you how to use this more than anything else. The thing I'll note here, first of all, is that we did a piece of work in Australia before we did the international piece, which has been really helpful because it kind of gives a bit of something to anchor it to. So where we've had a consistent question, we include Australia data. So here is one of them. So you can see that 38% of Australians who eat blackberries would eat it as a snack, and then breakfast is the second biggest one. Most similar to India, but you can see across the other markets, particularly Vietnam and Indonesia, it's far more diverse in terms of the day parts that they consume it. So that's how to read that. So once again, once you start going into the markets, you can see the differences. There are base sizes on here at the bottom just to show you how the validity of these numbers. The kind of snack, so we then expand or magnify the snacking and snack between lunch and dinner. So it's that that afternoon snack, which seems to be the most popular for blackberries, on Mr. Slide there. So how did you consume? If you look at the Australia data, fresh on its own is the number one, but that's bigger than any of the others actually. And so particularly Indonesia, you can see that there's quite a diversity, and we saw that previously. And that other bucket is expanded down there. You can find all the data in the appendix, by the way. So when these are grouped, it's merely for this summary level, but all the data can be found in the appendix. Where were you? Pretty consistent, although in Australia, mostly at home, 82%, but very consistent across all other markets, 69% overall for these targets. Where did you get it from? So I purchased it myself, was key, but then for other markets like Indonesia, more family dynamics going on that we often see in the Asian markets coming through here. Who are you with? This is always an interesting one because in Australia, there's lots of consumption, just myself. We saw this across lots of commodities. But you can see in the Asian markets, India, Vietnam, particularly Vietnam, Indonesia, it's those family dynamics and multi-generational households where there's lots more sharing occasions going on, or meals with other people, far more than Australia, which is not surprising to many of you, I'm sure. Now then the why gets a bit of a different treatment, mainly because when we did the work in Australia, we did a piece on a demand space modelling which factored and dimensionalised the reasons why people buy things. And what we found this was consistent across the globe, which is not surprising. The relative importances of each one are different, but what we found was that these 6 core universal driving needs were common across all geographies. And that's taste, convenience or quick and easy, health and nutrition, indulgence, physical and mental energy, and connection. So one or more of these, and generally a combination of the reasons why people pick up fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And when we look at the priority markets, it's taste that comes up number one, 57%. Connection, 47, the next one. So really a sharing fruit, much more so than other commodities, and also convenient came up very strongly. So these, you'll see there's a mixture of styles here, and once again, it's to go, there's 3 levels really. There are those summary level slides, then there's these mixture of insights and data, and then for those data hungry people, we've got all the data here in quite some detail, which shows you the differences across markets. And in the appendix, you get this for every market. So so I won't go through every one of these in detail, but what these do is when you look at the profiles of each of these markets, you can kind of see where different markets differ in terms of what is important. So I think the most interesting thing for me when I look at it is Australia, very strong on taste and convenience, whereas connection, very small. And we saw that in that just by myself was much higher, which is consistent with that connection being low. But then when you look at India, Vietnam and Indonesia, and even UAE, connection is much bigger as a reason why people buy blackberries. So that kind of gives you a lens on what consumers and how they go about and why they buy these types of these products. So much more of a sharing fruit in other Asian markets compared to Australia. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And so the different profiles helps you understand how you might go after consumers in different markets. And I could see for Vietnam, indulgence, we saw that earlier, 48%, that's half the population, say that actually a blackberry is an indulgence. So much higher than other markets there. So let's so that's how to read it. So let's just canter through so that I can make sure that we cover all the content. There's more detail here. So if you want to know what that means in a bit more detail, this sort of expands it out, and even there's more expanded views in the appendix as well. So just a few notes here. Everyone would eat it in Vietnam. So once again, it's that sharingness that comes out very strongly in that particular dimension. But taste is number one here across the board. Refreshing is much bigger in Indonesia and in India than anywhere else. When we look at functional stuff, almost a third of people say refreshing taste. There's also rich in antioxidants, and fresh and light is another key thing. That's on average. And once again, there's the detail. A few of the things that come out, aiding in digestion is one that pops in Vietnam. And in Indonesia, fresh and light and rich in antioxidants seem much higher than other markets. So an interesting one. So you can see that going after different markets requires different things, and there are different levers to pull. That's the way to really read these charts and to use them in that way. When it comes to the premium opportunity, so this is getting back to how do you grow, how do you get that price premium? So to command a price premium for blackberries across the board in these strategic markets, freshness is the most important thing. Organic is the next most important thing. High in vitamins and minerals, 27, and safe and trusted is the next most thing. So these are the 4 things you need to focus on to be able to sell a premium blackberry in the strategic priority markets. And once again, there's the detail. So when you go into, say, Vietnam, it's this right state of ripeness, which is the second highest thing in Vietnam. So you can kind of see how that differs, whereas that's not as big a deal in Indonesia, much closer to Australia and the other markets, in fact. So that's an outlier there for... And Indonesia, premium packaging is really important. So once again, if you're going in Indonesia, you need to keep that in mind. They're really big on packaging, whereas in Australia, not so much. Vietnam, neither. So it's really that ripeness in Vietnam compared to packaging in Indonesia. So just an example of how to read it again. And then finally, the barriers and price, 30%, so almost a third saying it's too expensive. Bruising easily is the next one, and there's also alternatives. So it's how do we compete with those the substitutes, and the substitutes are down the bottom there. So it's how do we compete with bananas, apples, and mangoes across the board. And you can see here that this is by market, by those strategic markets. Why wouldn't you choose it? You can see expense across the top. Vietnam, we saw bruising easily. Looking for some other outliers here. Quality is often poor in Vietnam, so and that lends itself to that bruising. So you can see how those 2 data points go together. Bruising easily and poor quality products. So resolving that will really help sell more blackberries, and particularly premium in Vietnam. And then this is where you're going. So this just tells you, if you're in Vietnam particularly, there's an outlier there. Apples are the second biggest choice in Vietnam, whereas in the UAE, people are buying strawberries and bananas as the closest substitute. So you can kind of see who you're competing with in these charts. And then each one has this at their own page. So at the end of all that, we wrap it all up. No data on this page. And this is really the where to play and how to win. So firstly, focusing on the strategic priority markets is that where to play. So this is about focus on markets where the penetration is high. So we saw that in the data. Consumers are willing to pay a premium for quality blackberries. And we see that in Indonesia, UAE, Vietnam, and India. So they're those priority markets. And we can leverage the already high appeal of Australian blackberries across all priority markets. So Australian blackberries have high appeal across all these 4. So let's continue that and let's use that to sell more. And this can drive incremental growth in Australian blackberries. So then there are 3 other factors in how do you go about that then. So the first of all, we need to deliver on the core consumer needs. And those core needs for blackberries are to be refreshing, tasty, and indulgent to share. They're the 3 things that came up across those priorities. We also need to ensure that our blackberries are above par for being rich in antioxidants, fresh and light, and that serve as that quick and easy snack or meal ingredients. So it's more that functional stuff. So they're the core things. Now to sell premium, or to get that price premium, what we need to do is maximize our opportunity by making them fresher, free of pesticides, so organic is big, high in vitamins and minerals, and come from a safe and trusted source. So they're the 4 things we saw. The data tells us is how you command that price premium. And then the final thing is how do we reduce those barriers to make sure that we don't put people off buying blackberries. Price is a thing that, if there's a way to address that, particularly relatively speaking to the competitors, that would help a lot. But more functionally, bruising is actually the most important functional thing, and that would stop people drifting to more exciting alternatives like bananas, apples, and mangoes. They're the 3. So each commodity gets one of these. If you just want to see the answer, this is it. But you've got all the data in the background, as you can see, to support why we've come to these conclusions. So I'll pause there before we go on, and I'll and share some of the other commodities.
Thanks, Pat. We've had a request if we could jump to blueberries or strawberries next, but blueberries probably is the priority, and I don't recall what's next in the commodity list, but I think it's really useful that you go all the way through one commodity, so when people are accessing the reports, they do actually understand how to read it themselves. But are there any questions on blackberries? Great.
I'll carry on. So yes, Mila, yeah. I spent a bit more time on that just to show how to read it, but I'll be more economical with time now for the next ones, and we'll hit the high notes. Right. So for blueberries, which in alphabetical order is the next one. So yeah, you can see the answers very similar, although there is difference here. You can kind of see where things land. Nonetheless, Indonesia, Hong Kong now is in there. India and UAE were the ones that came up. But for blueberries, I think the most interesting thing here, particularly compared to other commodities, is the addressability is very strong for lots of these. And yeah, I mean, relatively speaking, the low-hanging fruit, there's still quite a lot and on the cusp. So there are lots of options here to go after, and no doubt you're already taking advantage of those. So you can see Vietnam, Malaysia right on the cusp. Singapore, Taiwan and Qatar. It's worth noting that these are relative, so yeah, you keep that in mind, because there's lots of stuff that's very addressable and pretty attractive. USA, very attractive for blueberries, but you know, it's that distance and all those things that I mentioned before that create that, just harder to go after for USA, but nonetheless, if you can and you choose to, there's a very attractive opportunity there. UK, Japan, Korea, you know, relative to these, we wouldn't suggest focusing much on those, particularly given the amount of olive green and light green that I can see on this page to the right. So yeah, pausing there before we just go through some of the metrics. And in fact, it'd be interesting to know any views on this, whether this is surprising or there are any outliers here. And I'm happy to just delve into quickly some of the data that goes into this if there's any explanation required.
I think Jenny put it on there. Can you please tell us why Japan scored low? Because obviously it's been a bit of a holy grail for Australian blueberry industry. So if we're going to pivot away, we probably need to understand why, so we can articulate that to our members.
Okay, perfect. So look, once again, the first metric on penetration, Japanese people are saying it's very low, the lowest, and actually quite, in fact, it's half the penetration of the second lowest. So Taiwan is 18 and Japan is 9. And then by the time you get up to the USA, UAE and others, you know, you can see just the volumes are higher. Now, once again, this question is a very simple question. It's a very common question. There's nothing tricky about it. There's no sort of, you know, hidden nuance in here. It's a very simple question, and it's asked across 13 markets in exactly the same way. So I'm confident that this is the data that's coming through. So that in our calculation, penetration is a thing that, relatively speaking, means that it's not so much. Sorry, go on, Rachel.
Can I ask, is this like, obviously this is people saying what they do.
Yep.
How does that how does that compare to, you know, do we have any actual penetration data?
Yeah, and that was what was used to come up with the markets in the first place. So that is why it's here. But look, there's another couple of metrics that I think we should have a look at, and then we can have a further conversation. Okay. Yeah, because the other one is and then when we look at premiumness, yes, okay. So this is the other thing that we see, Rachel, is that the willingness to pay a premium, once again, is relatively lower. And we saw this across lots of commodities. So I won't use the word brand Australia, but the perception of Australia as a premium product in Japan is relatively much lower than other markets. And so when we, I know in the past that might have been different. And I'm sure at the time that we went into Japan, there might have been a halo. But what this data is showing, and it's actually consistent for lots of commodities, that the halo of Australia in Japan is not there right now, certainly when this study was done. So you know, if you were to start from a standing start right now, you'd be looking at other markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and this is what it's suggesting, that you've got a greater potential to sell a premium priced blueberry compared to Japan. And this is consistent, as I say. Market access attractiveness is pretty good, which is not surprising because that's where you are already. And then when we look at the willingness to buy Australia, once again, very low. You know, this sort of Australian halo is just not there. So look, Rachel, once again, it might be that there's lots of volume opportunity there, to your point around penetration, because that, you know, it's a big market. But we were tasked in this to look at profitable growth opportunities for the future. And the data that we're using as part of that calculus would suggest that relative to other markets, Japan is probably not where we'd say you should focus a lot of your investment. But once again, it's not that you shouldn't stay there or continue there. It's just that in the future, there are other markets that do appear from this data to have a much better return on investment opportunity for blueberries.
And excuse my ignorance. So I was recently in Japan just on holidays, and I think the thing that absolutely knocked my socks off was how much people are prepared to pay for fruit in Japan. Like when you see a $60 melon and, you know, this, that, and the next thing. So my question is, and I don't quite know how to articulate it, is like, so what people perceive as a premium in Indonesia, where everything's pretty cheap, they might go, yeah, I'd pay more for premium. Whereas in Japan, where everything's really expensive, they go, well, they're already really expensive. Why would I pay more? But for our returns, the relative return is better. Does that?
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and what I was suggesting, that goes back to that point 4 consideration. It was impossible for us to work out what the selling price for a particular company to a particular wholesaler in Japan is. Okay, so the research couldn't, you know, it's physically or just impossible to do all that. So what we would encourage you to do is to, if you've got data which can support that you're getting a good price premium, despite what this consumer data tells you, then I would bake that into your decision. And if it still makes commercial sense, absolutely go for it. That we're not saying that. And so please don't take this as definitive to say that absolutely Japan is not worth being in. And if you're getting commercially attractive arrangement, absolutely go with that. But what this is giving us a lens on is that there are other markets that we can look at to potentially get a premium for blueberries. That's what this is saying. So it'd be worthwhile investigating some of these other markets to see whether that's possible. And you may indeed get a more of a premium in other markets, but that we just can't do with one piece of research like this. It's just, this is supposed to be an input and a key input into it. But yeah, go after Japan if you're getting great commercial.
Oh, no, I think it's really good because I think that, like I said, you know, I've been in berries for 5 years now nearly, and there's a bit of a Japan and China, and, you know, so I think it's really important to explore this. So it's not a criticism, it's just wanting to understand how that works, and that's fascinating, you know, and also having just recently been there, it's just a very interesting market.
Yeah, so look, I think, and that's really the nub of it, which is this research was all about opening our minds to beyond China, and as you say, Japan sort of sits in that bucket a bit too, and that's really what's driven this. But you know, really, some of these relativities are really significant, and this is one. So I would encourage you to embrace investigating other these markets, and there are reports on each one as well. So so please go down that direction. Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Any other comments or questions?
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Pat. I think I think what's really interesting is the number of and the size of the prize to the left-hand side of that figure in terms of, we've just heard from Rachel how exciting Japan is, and look at all of the possibilities to the left-hand side of Japan on this particular figure we're looking at. I don't see any further hands up, so I'm going to suggest we keep going.
Okay. So what I might do then, in the interest of time, is I'll focus on those summary slides, and then you kind of know where to find the details. So so let's just move on through. So yes, once again, just as a quick, I'll call out the key takeouts here for blueberries. Snacking between lunch and dinner, afternoon snack, breakfast and dinner coming through strongly. Fresh on its own is quite big as part of a snack. Tasty, connection and quick and easy are the top three in terms of why, and at home with family. When we look at functionally, fresh and light, refreshing taste is big, and sweet is another one that comes through. Premium opportunity for blueberries is around fresher, organic is there too, but quite a difference I think is the observation here for each of the 4 priority markets. They have got a different reason why they're buying premium, so I think that's worth investigating as you go down and interrogate these. Cost is obviously a big one, and then you can see apple, bananas, mangoes, strawberries, table grapes as well in UAE are a competitor there. So I won't go into all of these detail, but you can kind of see that there are different profiling. And once again, I'm looking at Indonesia, often comes out as quite a different market, so that's worthwhile investigating. Where were you? More difference here, particularly in India. So a lot more out of home in India. So that's a curiosity. And once again, there's detail to delve into in that, in the appendix and in the market report. So that would be a useful thing to follow up on. Where did you get them from? A little bit of difference there. Sorry, I missed one. And once again, that family dynamic coming through, who you're with, a lot more sharing, particularly in Indonesia here. In terms of the whys, tastes 47%, so almost half. Quick and easy and indulgence, so they're quite high, all of those ones. So really strong reasons why people buy blueberries. Connection, big again in Indonesia and India as well. So there's that connection, second highest thing for India. Refreshing popping there quite strongly in India and Indonesia. So that's the importance of choosing. So that's the detail. Then when we look at the functional things, fresh and light, refreshing and sweet. All about a quarter actually. So not strong, but the 3 of them together represent something that's significant. And you can see here now in the detail, fresh and light being a really strong one across those top 3 markets there. So when it comes to premium, the 4 things are fresher, number 1, significantly number 1 there. Then the next 3 things, sweeter, more flavour and high in vitamins, the next 3 things that help define what you might need in a premium blueberry to command that price premium. Looking at the detail, Indonesia has some differences there. Flavour in Hong Kong was important. Sorry, I missed a chart here. So this is barriers. So price, a third of people say it's expensive. There's exciting alternatives, and bruising is another thing similarly to blackberries. And I think we find that across all the fruits and a lot of the commodities actually, that bruising is a big deal. And then the detail there you can see when you so choose. So once again, at a high level, it's the willingness to pay a premium that we've just talked about was very strong in Indonesia, Hong Kong, UAE and India. And the high appeal for Australia is very big too. So that's the key with the where to play. Refreshing, tasting and indulgent to share, the big core things, and the functional things, sweet, fresh and light, quick and easy. The few things that came up there. Leveraging the premium, we saw it fresh is the big one, but also sweet flavour and the high in vitamins and minerals, another one that to get that premium opportunity for blueberries. And addressing expense if possible, but bruising is another big one, and that will stop that drift to apples, bananas and mangoes. So that's blueberries. Any questions before I move on to the others?
I don't see any questions in the chat. I think we'll keep going.
Keep going? Great. Okay, raspberries next. Or did you want strawberries? Was that the next one that was?
Strawberries was the request, if possible.
Yeah, we can do
Yes,
that.
please.
Yeah,
Sorry, I have to go in about 15 minutes, and so I'm really interested in the strawberries.
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you.
Don't worry, we
Okay.
will come back to raspberries, everyone.
I'm also interested in raspberries. Don't tell them that I love them.
Okay, well, look, so I think, well, there's the answer, Rachel, certainly that our data is spat out. Indonesia, Vietnam, UAE, India again, but also lots in the right-hand side. So there's lots of opportunity. And I think we'll find when we look at the detail again is that it's the Japan dynamic going on where relative to other markets, they did choose less. So once again, weighing that up with your other data and the commercial realities of each individual company and the arrangements that you have with your exporter or importer, that's an important element here. But what this does suggest, if Japan was a good opportunity for strawberries once upon a time, then there's lots of other opportunity in other parts of Asia. And I think what this chart, that's really another way to read this chart. Other than Japan, Rachel, is there anything else that interests you here?
Well, it's not just me. I think others might have. I mean, Japan in some ways for strawberries is an obvious one because our strawberries are just not premium enough for the Japanese market, and I think that's the difference in interest. The difference with strawberries is that unlike the other berries, our quality's probably not as good as other countries that we may be competing with potentially.
Good. Okay, I see another question.
Yeah, I think it's from Sukhvinder. Would you like to turn your microphone and camera on and ask your question?
Yes, we tried few times from Tasmanian strawberries to Singapore and Hong Kong, and we didn't get that good response from the consumers, and end up having claim, etc., etc. So definitely, our strawberries is not that great. The one they're getting from Korea or Japan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. I mean, they're not in that top quadrant, so that's the type of information that I think contributes again to this, which is that this gives you a guide. But what this would suggest is that those other 4 markets at the top right would be more worthwhile than Hong Kong and Singapore here. So that's what this data would suggest.
Yeah, and Patrick Driscoll's, we got new variety Zara. So we did try that as well. Good response. Like initially when we started, really good response in Singapore, and they're paying premium. But again, the traveling time is killing us because we're shipping fruit from New South Wales, Sydney.
Yeah.
So we actually, transport from Tasmania to Sydney. It takes 3 days to get there. And then by the time we wrapped up and we ship it to Singapore and Hong Kong, it probably 6 days landed in those destinations. And so I think the shelf life we recommended 6 days. So it's more like that time is killing us.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there are some realities at that sort of point, and that once again, that's those extra data points to bring into this analysis. So remembering this is from a purely consumer point of view, but there are obviously market access issues that you may face that you either have to overcome, or that is just a reality of another metric that would go into this calculation. So yeah, I'd encourage you to throw all that in when you make that decision. Okay, so any other questions, or I'll crack on through?
Thanks, Pat. Crack on through.
Okay, so we won't go through all these because you now know how to sort of read all of those. So we'll just go into this snapshot then, because it's the so for strawberries, it's the breakfast, snacking, lunch, bit of a range here, and then dinner in Indonesia, so maybe more of a dessert. The how, fresh on its own, but in India, smoothie, frappe, juice, and also in Indonesia. So that's a difference in terms of how that might show up, and maybe that lends itself to another way to market in those where looking at having it in a smoothie or frappe might be a way to think about in terms of that. Taste indulgence, so it is an indulgence, which is great, which it lends itself to that premiumness. But to your point, Rachel, you then need to have a premium quality strawberry to be able to leverage that desire or that the reason, which is that strawberries are an indulgence, so it needs to look like one. They're also convenient. At home with family, once again, the where and the who with comes strongly through. In terms of more functionally, refreshing taste and sweetness is there. For the premium opportunity, fresh is number 1 across all markets. Trust in India came across strongly. Food safety, a big deal there, obviously. And then in Indonesia, it's the organic and that high in vitamins and minerals, which is that more health consciousness, which is coming through in Indonesia far more than other markets. Expense and bruising and quality comes through here, are the barriers to overcome, and you can see the substitutes there. All right, so let's just, I won't dwell on any of these, but the why Taste 59%, very high, and indulgence the second. So half the consumers across the priorities are saying that indulgence is a reason why they buy strawberry, and convenience as well. So all very high metrics compared to some of the other commodities. So that gives you a good guide as to why people buy them. I won't go through the detail of the markets. And then functionally refreshing taste 28%, fresh and light and sweet are the other two. And then for that premium opportunity, yeah, so 43%, it needs to be fresh. So, you know, that point you're just making around a route to market and how it gets up. It's if you can't get it fresh to market in time, then it's very hard to deliver that fresh, which does make that that most important premium metric hard to deliver. But there's the challenge then, that you have to deliver a fresh strawberry to be able to command a price premium. Consumers also want sweet, organic and safe and trusted. And then when it comes to the barriers to overcome, price is not as bad or is not as high as some of the other commodities. But bruising is the next biggest one, and poor quality. So those two go together. So once again, route to market might be making that a challenge, but they're really the things that you need to overcome so that you stop drift to apples, bananas and mangoes. And once again, it's all there on a page. I don't need to go over it, we've just seen it, but all of the, for those of you who just want to pick up what the answer is, this page can do the job. So unless there's any questions or comments on strawberries, given time, I might just skip to raspberries. Let's see what that's telling us.
Yeah, I think you're good to go straight to raspberries.
Straight up, yeah. Let's go. Oh, hang on, I missed a section. A bit more. Big reports. Okay, here we go. And yeah, slightly different dynamic going on here, actually. So we're seeing that India, UAE and Indonesia coming up very, very strongly. And then Vietnam and Malaysia are sort of on the cusp there. Low-hanging fruit. Yeah, for various reasons, these are quite... Singapore, whilst quite addressable, yeah, not very attractive according to this data, nor Korea and Japan. Slightly off the chart there, so we can fix that scaling, but they're low, and Japan once again coming down quite low in attractiveness, but on the cusp in addressability, which might suggest that there's already market access. And then there's quite a division between what's on the right of the chart and the left of the chart here, which is interesting. But USA, very, very high here. So I don't know if we're doing any business with USA at the moment, but certainly an attractive opportunity. But that relative addressability is always a problem for the USA. So yeah, hard to make the economics work in many cases. So so that's what we're seeing here. So any comments or thoughts on this one? I'm happy to share some of the data if there's a question on it. Nope.
Yeah, we do have a question in the chat. What's the key metric that splits UAE and Qatar? And that's for this one, for raspberries.
Okay, let's look at it. So penetration is pretty high for both, actually. So you've got very high UAE and pretty high Qatar. Well, 35 to 28. So there's a 7% difference on penetration. And then here, there's another 6% difference. So that's a metric that's changing things. And then here, UAE, higher on market access. So once again, you know, these all add up. So it seems like a combination of things here for attractiveness. And when it comes to addressability, yeah, this starts splitting it quite. Once again, another 13% in UAE versus 9% in Qatar. So, you know, relatively a bit of a difference there. The premium raspberry question, UAE, well, there you go. That's the one. The Qatar is a lot lower here for the willingness to pay premium raspberry. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question. I'm so familiar with looking at the data that I can kind of see it, but does that make sense in terms of having looked at those, glanced at those numbers, that that's what's splitting them apart? You know, most of the others, there's always a gap between Qatar and UAE, but in this case, it's quite different.
Yeah, thanks for getting another question or comment typed in. But Pat, the way that you're explaining the figures and how they're calculated is starting to make sense, and I'm confident our listeners can hear the patterns in that, so they can start to do it themselves. Jenny's just typing. No, maybe she's not. Sorry. Are there further questions or any comments there? Oh, there is a question, Pat. Does Qatar perform well on paying a premium for any commodity, or is that just the market? And there is just a reminder that for every market, for each of these individual markets, there's an individual market report. So you could go to the Qatar market report. You could look at that in comparison to UAE to look at key differences. But Pat, I'll let you answer that one. Does Qatar perform well?
It is specific to raspberries, which means that the data is much more specific, which is why we asked that question. So this is not a general premiumness. But what you can see is that when you look at all markets, you can kind of see a pattern. And Japan is the classic one where, once again, Japan, their willingness to buy premium is not as much. But I think there was a point made that they're already pretty expensive. And then the willingness to pay more for a premium, that's the more general one. But it is quality raspberry specifically. So the question is, would you be willing to pay more for a premium raspberry? That's specific to the commodity. So it does give a very, very clear answer for your commodity. I think that's kind of what you're wanting to know, really, hopefully.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Rachel, for letting us know you had to leave, and again reminding folks that we are recording it, so you will be able to access the whole lot. Jenny's got a hand up. Jenny, would you? Oh, sorry, Rachel.
I was just going to say thank you, and I think it's a great report. I think there's lots in there for us to chew over. And like you said, it's not the only source of truth, but I think it gives us some really interesting points to consider when we're making these decisions that are data-driven. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for your questions.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Jenny, we might go to your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, I won't turn on my camera because I'm having connectivity problems, but qualifying the question I just asked, what I actually want to know is, does Qatar ever pay a premium for anything? So is there a category that does well, thus indicating they could be lifted, or are they just cheap all the time?
Oh, so let me go back to that.
That's probably the country report I was trying to elicit.
Oh, yes. I think, you would go to the country report and that will give you a view on that. And we can certainly, the data is in here somewhere. It's just not in a neat form on the page. But we could find that out for you, and particularly if there's any commodity of interest, or whether you're interested in other. So you can compare these across other commodities, by the way. I think that's the best way to do it. So you've got you've got access to all the reports, hopefully, but all of the fruits can be found in this single report. So in one report, you can thumb through and you'll be actually able to see Qatar and how that premium thing ranks across all the fruits. Which might actually be the best place to start. But if you're interested in the other commodities in vegetables and fruit and nuts, you can find them too. Hope that answers your question, Jenny.
Thank you.
Yeah, so all the data's there. It's just not in a simple form at the moment.
Thanks, Pat. And we are happy to take all the questions, and of course you can see in the chat that Jade's put the link to the reports. If you haven't requested access to the reports, please follow that link and do request access. Hort Innovation wants to put those in front of our Australian horticultural sector first, so you will be asked to keep them confidential, and if others in your network want access, please encourage them to reach out and apply for access to them. We think there's a richness of information in these reports. Pat's giving us some guidelines on how to read it. We are confident that you will read the reports and look at the data and ask more questions, and so hopefully you'll start to ask those questions and come back to us on that. And Olivia, I think you're probably going to answer Jenny's question in the long term by Olivia starting to type something into the chat there. She's probably already thought of the answer. So
thank
Pat,
you, Olivia.
did we interrupt you, or you had more?
No, not at all. I'm just looking at the time, and we've got just enough time to get through raspberries, and we've taken questions along the way, which is good. So I think we're doing all right. And yes, Olivia, I'm sure will be in the background trying to answer that question, which is in there. Okay, so just the raspberry snapshot then. So once again, India, Indonesia, UAE, breakfast, snacking, and there's dessert as well coming through in Indonesia, which is the wen. Fresh on its own in a salad is an interesting one here. So once again, it was fascinating to see some of the differences in geographies. I didn't know that avocados, for example, were used in smoothies in some of these Asian markets. So going into the country reports really gives you an interesting way to understand how your commodities are being used in a different way to Australia. So I encourage you to do that. The why, taste, indulgence, and connection are the three that come up, and at home with family. In terms of more functional things, refreshing taste, sweet and rich in antioxidants come up very strongly. The premium opportunity, fresher again, not surprisingly for berries across the piece, that having a fresh berry is really what differentiates a premium berry from a non-premium berry, and that's coming strongly through this data. And then in those markets, Indonesia, UAE, high in vitamins and minerals, so that health benefit of raspberries is seen as a strong one for buying a premium. They are expensive, however, and there are alternatives, so we need to be cognizant of that. Apple, bananas, mangoes coming through strongly. Won't focus on these because we've just covered them in the summary version. So I'll go to the why. The why, 58% taste, so that's very high. So really, that's what people look for in a raspberry, and that rings true. They're also seen by almost half the population on those three strategic priority markets as indulgent, which lends itself to that premium opportunity, and also convenient. Once again, the details all there for you, but if we go to the functional stuff, well, there's top three things, all 24%. Refreshing taste, sweet and fresh and light, functionally the three things you have to deliver at a functional level for raspberries. And then the premium opportunity, we talked about that freshness, and not as high as the previous commodity, but similar. 39% say they want a premium raspberry that's fresh. And then the next ones are all pretty similar. Higher in vitamins and minerals, organic or free from pesticides, and flavorful. The next three. So they're the things that will enable you to command a price premium for raspberries in the strategic priority markets. And then finally, the barriers to overcome, price, 27%. Then you're competing with alternatives and qualities, hindering people picking up a raspberries compared to other things, and they'll pick up apples, bananas and mangoes more likely after that. And so, yeah, the where to play, how to win, we talked about those four markets. So it was penetration and willingness to pay premium that really guided those three markets as the core, the strategic priorities. And it's improving the knowledge and appeal of Australian raspberries, which would help drive that incremental growth. So there's a different job to be done compared to some of the other commodities. And it's delivering taste, indulgence, and that good for sharing for all markets is good. Functionally, sweetness, fresh and light and refreshing, and healthy breakfast, lunch or snack. So there's a bit of a range of day parts going on. To leverage the price advantage or the premium, fresher is the number one. We saw that higher in vitamins and minerals are good, but also sweeter, free of pesticides, more flavour is another one that came up. Expense is a big one. Quality is the thing that we can address readily, and it's around that freshness. So if you can improve the quality and improve freshness, that's really going to enable you to take the advantage for raspberries in these export markets, and that stops that drift to the substitutes that we see there. So yeah, that's really it, and fortunately we've got through all four commodities in that time, and hopefully that makes sense, and now you know how to read it. Sorry we didn't have time to go through the detail, because I do enjoy detail, as you can see, but nonetheless I'm happy to take more questions now, and yeah, go back into any of the data that you're interested in at this stage.
Thanks, Patrick. That's wonderful. Thank you also to Olivia, who's been able to pull out that Qatari report on what was premium in Qatar. Any questions? Anyone want to have a conversation? Feel free to please turn on your cameras and microphones so that we can use our experts here to help answer your questions if you've got them. And I'm going to already thank those questions that have come during the presentation. You can see the questions actually help you guide Pat about what we're thinking about how we'd like to read the report. So I hope you can see as Patrick flicked through the reports and how that information builds the story. I'm not seeing any hands up or any questions. I think we may have answered them all, Patrick. I think just an amazing job. A big thank you from us to you at Kantar, to you and Olivia for your work on this and your time today to explain that and the berry industries one by one. You may have noticed at one stage there was more than 220 slides in Patrick's pack, and so we have given you a huge amount of information. The full reports, if you follow the link in the chat, you can access them there. I hope very much you'll find a richness of information and also an opportunity to ask lots of questions amongst yourselves afterwards. If there's anything else that comes up during those questions, we're really happy to hear about those. This consumer-led approach is a different set of data than what we've had in the past. If you're already excited about a market like Japan, you can see where new geographies might be of interest. And Pat did spend some time at the beginning explaining some of the caveats on that, and you'll read that in the report. So I think if there's no questions, we'll say thank you very much. If anyone's got any questions on this work or the project, please reach out to Jade Curley. Jade can turn her camera on, but everybody knows Jade in the team. She's the project lead for this, and she's very happy to help answer your questions or put you in front of the experts. If we can't answer them at Horde Innovation, Jade will make sure that Patrick and the team at Kantar can get a direct answer to you. I think we'll say thanks, everybody, and have a lovely day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Jade. Everyone.